Welcome to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. Like any good marriage, we will debate, evaluate, and sometimes quarrel about how privacy and security impact business in the 21st century.
Hi, Jody Daniels here. I'm the founder and CEO of Clover Advisors, a certified women's privacy consultancy. I'm a privacy consultant and certified informational privacy professional, providing practical privacy advice to overwhelmed companies.
Hi, Justin Daniels here. I am passionate about helping companies solve complex cyber and privacy challenges during the life cycle of their business. I am the cyber quarterback, helping clients design and implement cyber plans, as well as help them manage and recover from data breaches.
This episode is brought to you by Clover Advisors. We help companies to comply with data privacy laws and establish customer trust so that they can grow and nurture integrity. We work with companies in a variety of fields, including technology, e-commerce, professional services, and digital media. In short, we use data privacy to transform the way companies do business. Together, we're creating a future where there is greater trust between companies and consumers. To learn more and to check out our new book, Data Reimagined, Building Trust One Bite at a Time, visit redcloveradvisors.com. You can add any more instruments to our introduction here?
If I was good at playing any.
Yeah, that's not your specialty.
Not at all.
No, maybe we should have our daughter come. She could sing one time.
She sings all the time.
I know, and she could come and sing a tune. Maybe that's what we need. We need her to write a jingle.
We could have her write the privacy and security jingle, since she asks very interesting privacy questions for a 9-year-old.
She does. You have taught her well. She does not like giving personal information anywhere.
Indeed. All right. Well, let's move on today. We have our terrific guest today. So I will introduce our guest. Today we have Troy Bettencourt, a technically skilled people and process-oriented leader with more than a decade of supervisory experience in the DFIR, law enforcement, and military spaces. 3 of those years as a member of the executive leadership team of a government agency. Approximately 18 years of digital forensic incident response experience and 3 years of eDiscovery experience, to include an assignment as the National eDiscovery Program Manager for a federal government agency. Good morning and welcome, Troy.
Well, thank you, Justin. That was a great intro.
I can read well.
Well, Troy, it's really nice to meet you. It would be great to kind of dive a little bit deeper into that significant experience of yours and bring us full circle to what you're doing today.
Yeah, absolutely, Jody. It's been quite a circuitous journey. Sort of dipped in and out of the DFIR space over the years for various reasons. And I think overall, it probably gave me some experiences that I wouldn't have had if I stayed strictly in the field, especially on the business side and understanding business operations and impacts, et cetera, from a client perspective. But I actually started out as a special agent for a federal law enforcement agency. And at first, I worked on your more traditional crimes, your murder, larceny, arson, drugs, et cetera. And then a colleague and really good friend of mine moved into cybercrime investigations in 2001. And he was really smart, great with computers, really awesome guy. And he invited me to come work for him. The problem was I had pretty much zero computer skills. I could kill it with PowerPoint, but that was really the best I could do. And I told him that, but at the time they were focused on trying to bring on folks that had solid investigative skills to teach them the geek, as opposed to trying to bring people that had the IT skills and teach them the investigations, because that hadn't gone well when they tried that. So really, I came over there. I had no skills. There really wasn't like university programs focused on DFIR back then, or really any vendor agnostic training. It was pretty much vendor training or OJT. So I did a lot of that. And really for the first 6 months, I think that was my first true experience with imposter syndrome, because I came from a place where I was a subject matter expert, was thrown in this field I knew nothing about. And I would drive home every night and tell my wife, they're going to realize I don't know what I'm doing. They're going to fire me. And then like one day I woke up 6 months later and it started to all sort of make sense. And I certainly wasn't great, but I sort of knew what I was doing. And then in 2005, due to some family hardship reasons and a bit of burnout, we relocated to Florida and bought a small business in the construction industry. So that was my first departure from the field. After a few years, that was boring. So I joined our local police department and was basically an administrator and a department executive. Then fast forward a few more years, and I went back into federal law enforcement, strictly in cybercrime. And I was really fortunate to work on some high profile investigations, really, really large global incidents, and worked with awesome people across the spectrum, from investigators, law enforcement agents, support staff, technical folks, and counsel. Then I spent a year as a sales engineer for a forensic software company. That was sort of my professional purgatory. I realized I'm not really into sales. I'm not well suited for it. Then I moved to SecureWorks, and I was there for 6.5 years. As Justin mentioned, most of that was as a senior most consultant globally. And then the last year, I went back into management, and that was also a great experience and a wonderful team. And then earlier this year, I moved over to IBM's X-Force, where I am now, and I lead our full service America's incident response practice. So that covers North, South, and Central America and the Caribbean regions.
Well, that was quite the journey. Thank you so much for sharing. It's always really interesting how people navigate. And I like the original part of how you, and I think this is true with people, how you take those investigative skills, but can teach some of the technical pieces. And sometimes it's really hard to take technical people and teach them some of those softer skills. So it's really interesting how you kind of got that start.
Yeah, it was, for whatever reason, I find it a lot easier to teach people technical skills. Investigative skills, I think, came natural to me too. I don't know how to teach people them. I don't really know how to nurture that. I think there's a little more of an innate capability there, whereas the technical skills, I think people with aptitude and drive, even if they don't have a technical background, can certainly enter the field.
Makes sense.
Troy, that's interesting because the way that I met Troy was we were on a incident response case together, and the key that Troy was so good at was explaining technical things to business people who were under time pressure with incomplete facts in a way that was understandable, to the point where I had asked to have two people on the file because I hadn't met Troy before. And looking back on it, I didn't need two people on the file because Troy was really good at explaining the stuff. So I say that because that's such a critical element of part of what we're going to talk about today, which is incident response and some best practices. And to your point, Troy, I don't know how easy it is to teach the innate skill to be able to explain something that's technical to business people in a way that they can understand and make business decisions when they're under pressure and it's a pretty emotional situation.
Definitely. Really, the way we do it, or I try to foster it both when I was at SecureWorks and now here at IBM, is I think it's experiential. So we try to ensure our more junior folks are paired with a senior person that's involved with dealing directly with C-level execs or boards, but also moving our reactive or emergency consultants to work on the proactive side as well, because you get to really see in an executive tabletop, what are those business decisions that you're not exposed to really in a real incident? In a real incident, you're probably talking to a CISO maybe, or a director, and you're not understanding why the business is making decisions they're making that may seem foolish to you as a technical person, but from a business perspective, they make sense. And when you're in those tabletop exercises or cyber range experiences, you see really what the business drivers are and understand why the decisions are being made that, again, in isolation, maybe don't make sense from a technical perspective.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned those proactive services because the first thing we wanted to have you talk about a little bit is what types of proactive cyber services are you seeing more companies buy these days?
So I think overall, it depends on the client. For the more security minded or maybe a little more security mature clients, seeing a lot more focus on value and not simply just satisfying like auditor or regulatory requirements, right? They don't want just the tech check a box tabletop exercise. They're going to do one a year and move on. They're really looking for a security journey so that at the end of a year, if they're a retainer client, or 3 years or whatever that term is, they can truly look back and say, we have improved our process, our program along the way. So we're still seeing a lot of the traditional offerings, the tabletop exercises, incident response plan, and playbook development, but we're also seeing the more value add, like I mentioned. So for example, we have a ransomware readiness assessment service, which is really a holistic consultative approach. It's not a technical controls assessment. We go in, we do interviews, we check controls, we check business processes to make sure that in the event of an incident, which usually is an indication of a failure of a control somewhere, the business processes and the people and the decision making can come to a better outcome. And then the other is we offer a cyber range. So think of it like a tabletop exercise on steroids with a ton of technical enablement. So, there's a virtual SOC. You can have your SOC folks sit at and respond to an incident in tooling that they're probably familiar with. We have role players come in and take the role of ransomware operators and do negotiations. We create fake business news segments like an MSNBC type segment talking about how the business has been impacted by ransomware and really make it immersive. And we found for those mature clients that are tired of the traditional rote delivery that they're pretty excited. And then I think threat hunting is just continuing to increase in demand, and threat hunting itself is morphing from a very simplistic look at a couple of alerts to see if there's a problem to really digging through data. And we're seeing more demand for that more comprehensive threat hunting than maybe in years past.
So I love the news segment part. I think that would be really interesting to be able to deliver. And Justin, I remember you did something similar when you done some of these types of tabletops before. When companies are evaluating companies to help them, service providers to help them with these types of proactive services, there's a lot of different ones out there on the market. It can be confusing. What would be some key differentiators that a company can look for when trying to select and purchase incident response services?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jody. And it really depends on the client. Of course, some clients, especially in maybe the SMB and SME space, often are very cost driven because the revenue is not there to support a very expensive security program. Whereas large enterprise, sometimes it's cost driven, but we're seeing it a lot more value driven. Here at IBM, we deal with a lot of very large, Fortune 50 companies across the world. So for them, it's mostly value driven. They really want to get value out of their expenditure, and they're willing to spend more for that value. And then sometimes it aligns with business verticals. Even if it's a large company, I've found like maybe manufacturing where they don't have a lot in the way of margins. They're a volume-based business. They're more cost-focused, whereas maybe financial services, especially, really are the value-focused clients. But regardless of what the focus or whether it's value or cost, there are certain attributes I think are really important. You've got to look at yourself as an organization and see what you expect the needs to be and align that with that firm that you choose. And as businesses become larger, they really need to look on firms that I think have a global reach and also have a lot of specialization, because as Justin can probably attest, in these enterprise-wide incidents, they're business critical. It's not, there's malware on a system, jump in, fix it, move on. This brings in so many people. We have crisis management. You have the IR consultants. You need malware reverse engineering. You need intel analysts, probably some offensive security folks to then test your remediation efforts. People experience in identity management. And all of those are really technical fields with a lot of depth. And if you go with maybe a firm that's more generalist approach, they have that breadth of experience, but maybe not the depth that's needed. And especially as the enterprise gets more complex, you need that more specialization. And then the other is, how big are they? Can they, should there be another SolarWinds or Kaseya or Proxy Shell event that's global? Do they have the bandwidth to support the retainers that they signed with you a year ago to actually service you? And then can they work 24/7? Because as most of us have probably experienced, the big cyber incidents don't happen, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. They tend to launch Saturday at 2 a.m. So being able to support in a major incident with a follow the sun model, 24/7, 365 is hugely important.
Those are some really great tips, especially the one where it happens on Saturday at 2 a.m. or Sunday at 3 in the afternoon. It is not a 9 to 5 activity.
No, it's the incident response witching hour. From
That's a
Friday
good
at
way to
3
say it.
p.m. on is the incident response witching hour because nothing good happens after 3 p.m. on a Friday.
I have had a couple clients before call me 5 o'clock on a Friday.
So, Troy, kind of like as a follow up, and I know this is a topic you and I have talked about, but obviously, with the rise of ransomware, it has had a significant impact on the cyber insurance market that most large enterprise customers that use service rely on to transfer risk. So, how is that insurance market impacting how you price and deliver incident response services, particularly for these companies who really need that depth and breadth that you provide?
Yeah, I think it's really been interesting, Justin. I went to some really early conferences years ago, some cyber insurance conferences. And at the time in that space, nobody knew how to price it. There was no actuarial data. They didn't have any models to work with. So there was a lot of guessing. And I think in the earlier years, if there was an incident, pretty much everything got covered. The insurers didn't really question anything. The client submitted the bills, they were signed off, and that was it. There was no effort at cost containment. As the industry matured, enterprise ransomware hit. So now the costs were just getting out of control. And then with the data theft component that brought in the regulatory compliance, et cetera, really saw that insurers were starting, one, to have actuarial data to support it, but two, where they were exposed a lot more. So then saw a lot more effort towards cost containment. And that has considerably driven down the insurance reimbursable per hour rates for DFIR response. But then I think maybe the last 2 years-ish or so, we're starting to see insurers, maybe even 3 years, become really more active. They're overseeing expenditures during an engagement. They're making sure the incurred costs are actually reasonable. They remain within the initial scope. And a key one is they're not efforts to improve the overall security program during an incident at a cost to the insurers, right? It's not, oh, we had an incident, so we haven't updated those Windows 7 systems forever. Now we're going to pass that cost on to insurance. That used to be pretty acceptable. Insurers wrote the check. Now we're really seeing them being focused on cost containment. And then as people are trying to get new insurance, they're probably seeing now that many of the major insurers are requiring that you have a mature security program. They probably have at least a self-assessment process that you have to go through, if not an assessment process that they oversee.
A lot of times, those insurance companies require you to ensure you have different security measures and, of course, know where your data is. So, Justin and I have a favorite phrase, know your data. Actually, Justin likes that phrase more than me. You really want your red Clover t-shirt. Anyone listening, please make him a t-shirt that says know your data.
But it has to say red Clover.
It has, okay, red Clover. There you go. Bonus points to anyone listening. But a lot of times people miss the connection between privacy and security, and they don't understand and they don't know where all of their data is. What do you find are the common reasons that happens?
So I think one, it's difficult. And it's really difficult when it's a large enterprise that's been around for decades to then decide it's time to get into bolting on a data privacy or security program after the fact, right? At that point, you have so much legacy technical debt, bureaucratic inertia, and years of poor people habits to fight against. And depending on the ability to communicate to the executive team for that level of support, the program's not going to be successful. If you don't have executive buy-in to really architect that program, I don't want to say enforce compliance, but to ensure compliance happens, it becomes a check the box exercise like a lot of other security efforts. And honestly, it's not a problem until it is, right? Then the chickens come home to roost, major cyber incident. And as the provider, we're asked by counsel that one of the chief concerns, of course, was data accessed and exfiltrated. And without that really good data privacy or security program that was implemented beforehand, we can never say no. We might be able to say it's unlikely, some gradation in response, but that's not going to make counsel happy. And we understand that. If the data is not there, we can't answer those questions. And I think really it becomes a prioritization of efforts, right? Security for so long has been secure the perimeter. If the castle walls are big, we don't have to worry about anything. And now we're seeing more of a defense in depth. But I still think data privacy and data security is so far in those layers as you come that it just hasn't penetrated yet, and it's not being prioritized until it is a problem, and then it's too late.
Well, hopefully, we'll just slowly make process at chipping away and getting it out of the little microcosm that it's in and get it broader. I think we're slowly getting there, especially with more regulations requiring companies to understand where their data is. Unfortunately, we don't want more incidents. But
I think with more firms like Red Clover focusing on it, it's become a true specialization, whereas before it was often, I think, a secondary or tertiary responsibility of somebody. And I think now that there's the awareness there, awareness comes with funding, hopefully we'll mature, because I think that's especially in regulated industries, it's such a huge risk.
I think I would add something that Troy said to really reiterate is, remember, the breach notification laws that trigger legal consequences are off of data, whether it's access or exfiltrated. And so I know in the case that Troy and I worked, it wasn't clear where all the data was. So we never could come to a conclusion. But what was interesting is, and this is another reason why you work with law enforcement, is we knew what kind of variant of ransomware it was. And between the work that Troy did and law enforcement telling us, yes, you're case number 70, and the last 67 cases, they don't exfiltrate or access data. They just encrypt the network because they want to get paid. That was how we were able to take a legally defensible position that no further notification was necessary. It was a combination of Troy's work, forensic, and also engaging with law enforcement to find out what they know, because they are a wealth of information, as Troy knows from his many years in working.
Collaboration is critical.
Yeah, and honestly, coming from that world and now operating in this world, for years, it used to be a one-way street. Law enforcement really was trying to get the information or further into their investigations, but there wasn't a lot of support back to the victim. Over the last decade, there's been such a sea change, and especially the FBI has taken such a proactive approach to really working with victims. And while the information probably flows more towards them because they can't share as much, they really are sharing information that helps in the response and in the business decisions about, for example, the data risk that you talked about, or maybe the risk of the threat actors coming back. Are they nation state aligned? Could they be on a denied parties list or an OFAC list? So it really changes. Years ago, I would have said, I don't know if you want to involve law enforcement yet. Now I think you almost have to really early on in the process.
Great. So now, to kind of switch topics, is everyone is using the R word, a recession word. And so, yes, an ugly R. So, from your perspective, how do you see a recession impacting cybersecurity budgets, and what might the unintended consequences of those decisions be?
Yeah, I think as often is the case with tough economic times, right? Your budgets are probably going to stagnate at best, but likely contract. For those with mature programs that have seen well-focused investment during the good times, it's not going to impact them probably as much. Now, from outside firms like ours, I would expect a decline in revenue because the lack of opportunities. I'm going to see an underinvestment probably in proactive work, maybe a decision to try to keep reactive work or emergency work in-house until they can't support it. All of those decisions, though, create a slow decline. So even if you've invested in a very mature program, all it takes is a few years of underinvestment, maybe not backfilling some key positions, and you lose a lot of that solid ground that you've claimed. But for those companies that never really fully invested in the program, I think this is going to be pretty perilous, especially if they really target cuts, because one of the most expensive areas is going to be people, right? FTEs are expensive. And as you cut people or don't backfill, that of course that means it's a do more with less attitude for everyone else. And that just means a slow degradation in performance over time, additional churn of people. And as that security posture slowly goes down, the risk is going to continue to grow up. I would imagine the threat actors aren't going to be as heavily impacted by a recession and are going to continue their activities. And then the other thing is, if an organization ends up having like enterprise ransomware or some other real business critical cyber incident, it's going to be even harder to respond when they don't have the people, the budgets, the established contracts with outside vendors. And I think that tips the scales for those incidents to almost become an existential crisis for the business, as opposed to a severe hiccup, but something they can bounce back. I really hope I'm wrong. Heck, I hope the recession forecasts are wrong. But I don't see any good coming out of a recession from a security perspective.
If you were talking to a company who had not as flush of a budget, they needed to make some cuts, what might you recommend to them to focus on, to try and keep? They have to make some types of decisions. Is there any particular areas that you might say, please make sure you stay focused in these for sure?
Oh, definitely. I passionately believe in people and process. They're going to win the day for you. And it may sound odd coming from someone, that's in a vendor industry that depends on selling services and products to organizations. But I really believe you can buy the most expensive and sexiest new security product that's in everybody's Magic Quadrant or Wave, and it's on CEO magazine. But if you don't have good people that you're not properly hiring and developing good people, and also, this is key, enabling them with solid business and security processes around them, you're exposing yourself to risk. I would take great people and process with moderately good tools over the opposite any day of the week.
Great advice. Thank you for sharing.
So, Troy, we like to ask this to everyone who comes on our show, which is, what is your best privacy or security tip that you might offer us if we were at a cocktail party and Jody was wearing a dress?
One, I would say people and process. Again, I am so passionate about that. It is the people and enablement processes over security controls every day. Secondarily, though, just the basic security controls. Pick your framework, CIS, whatever it is. Pick those top 10. Focus on them. Identity is huge. Most of our threat actors right now, it's all about getting in, and it's not that hard nowadays. And once they can, escalate to privileged access, they pretty much own the environment. So if you can implement those key security controls, your MFA, identity management, segmentation, just do the fundamentals. Your goal is not to be perfect. It's to just be slightly faster than the other slower gazelle on the plane when you're getting chased by the cheetah. You just have to outrun somebody else.
That was a lot of animals.
It really was.
You're in the national park. I just have to outrun you when the bear comes along.
That's it, right?
So, Troy, when you're not helping companies against cyber threats, what do you like to do for fun?
That's a good question. Since I spend so much time staring at screens, I try not to as much as possible, although I'm addicted to my phone like many. So really more hands-on stuff. Our daughter recently joined scouting, formerly known as Boy Scouts. So we've really enjoyed all the outdoor events, camping, and I forgot how much I just loved being outdoors like that. And then, I had mentioned a couple of times in the earlier question about some family health issues that caused some career changes. Because of that, we're sort of more homebodies and we don't travel as much as we used to and all that. So I focus on projects here at home. So anything from minor improvements, total renovations, and then most recently, I finished building a houseboat from recycled and reused materials.
Wow, that is quite impressive. There is no houseboat building going on over here for sure.
No.
What do you guys like to do for fun?
Cool.
What do you like to do for fun, Justin?
What do I like to do?
The audience wants to know.
Oh, for me? Oh, that's all things outdoors. That's easy. From mountain bike to skiing to squash. It's all.
Squash is indoors.
Yes, but it's still fun.
It doesn't count as outdoors. It's indoors.
I've seen courts outdoors in New York.
Okay, like one court outdoors.
It's active. I'll give you that.
We like hiking. I love the fall leaves, and baking. I enjoy baking. Yes. I do skew slightly on the healthier side, but I do love baking. Yes.
Very cool.
You know what it's like to live in this house? Oh, eat this cookie, eat this bake.
It's all about moderation. I mean, if you do all the exercise, then you might as well at least have a really good cookie to go with it.
So if you live in the South, is it true it's one stick of butter per cookie? Because that seems to be what I find as the ratio. Okay.
I haven't adopted that concept. No, maybe, but I might have ignored all those recipes. Troy, we've really enjoyed having you. If people would like to learn more and connect, where's the best place to send them?
LinkedIn always. That I'm constantly checking it, looking for new talent, new people. Whenever we have openings, want to see who's out there, and it's a great way to keep up with the trends, and then drive from there. So that's the easiest way to find me.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for joining. We really appreciate all the insight that you've shared to help protect companies against threat actors.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great, and great to see you again, Justin. And nice to meet you, Jody.
Likewise.
Thanks for listening to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes and check us out on LinkedIn. See you next time.